Today we're going to talk about how your ex feels when you ignore them. Now, I've thought long and hard about how to approach this, and I think I've actually found a really unique way of tackling this subject. You see, typically when you go online and search for answers to questions on good old Google, well, Google loves to put up all kinds of articles in front of you. Many of these articles barely scratch the surface of what you need to know. And for some reason, they all seem to contain the same broken format. Signs, tips, you get the idea. But in reality, that format for this topic makes no sense. Someone who is literally searching for an answer to how an ex feels when they ignore you don't need tips or signs. They need to understand an ex's response to silence. My team and I have so much experience seeing this because we recommend the no contact rule so frequently to our clients. Honestly, though, I think the correct way to diagnose responses is to look at how each attachment style handles being ignored. And from there, we can infer the feelings. So here's what I want to do. I want to help you diagnose your ex's attachment style. And then I want to go through each of the attachment styles and kind of explain this is what they're going to respond to when they're being ignored. Or this is some of the behaviors you can expect from them. So first things first, let's diagnose your ex's attachment style. I've always referred to attachment styles in 4 different ways. You have the secure style, the avoidant style, the anxious style, and the fearful style. So now the goal with attachment theory is to find yourself in the securely attached category. So there's not really a core wound for someone who has a secure attachment. Unfortunately, most of the individuals that I work with have insecure attachments, and it's those insecure attachments that have those core wounds that when irritated will trigger all sorts of different insecure behaviors. So let's tackle figuring out if your ex has an insecure attachment first. What you're going to want to look at is if they experience the following core wounds. So someone who has an anxious core wound is going to have a deep fear of abandonment. Someone who has an avoidant core wound will have a deep need for independence. And then someone who has a fearful core wound will bounce from one core wound in the anxious side to the other core wound in the avoidant side, kind of like a piñata. So what does that look like in real life? Well, okay, so someone who has an anxious core wound, when they sense that a breakup is sort of incoming, they're going to panic and do everything they can to try to fix the problem to an almost annoying degree. They'll constantly check in with you, ask how you're doing, and every little infraction that they deem spells trouble in paradise will cause them to overcrowd you. On the opposite end of the spectrum, someone with an avoidant core wound, they're going to feel if they rather are being overcrowded or feel like they're losing independence, they'll basically dip out and avoid. So sometimes you'll even see like big life commitments, like moving in together, getting married, things of that nature. It's caused them to feel like they're losing their independence, and that will freak them out. And then, of course, we have the fearful individuals. This is where things get really wild. So they're going to literally go from one extreme to the next. One minute they're trying to save your relationship, and the next they will want nothing to do with you. So let's take a look at how avoidant exes respond to being ignored. Now, all of 2021 and 2022, I actually spent researching avoidance. I wrote hundreds, no joke, hundreds of articles on this. And my team and I have found that avoidants tend to be the most common ex that we encounter. And it's not even close. It's by a very large margin. So here's what's important or interesting about avoidance. Most of them is going to follow the path of the relationship death wheel. Now, the relationship death wheel basically has 8 stages in it. I talk about it ad nauseum on the YouTube. The thing that's of interest to us is stage 6. Now, stage 6 is interesting to us because usually when people come into our orbit and start ignoring their exes is right around when the breakup has occurred. And right when the breakup has occurred, stage 6 happens next. Now, stage 6 is actually called separation elation, and I've talked about it a lot. So basically, after a relationship ends, people with an avoidant attachment style tend not to show much anxiety or distress, often feeling an initial sense of relief at the relinquishing of obligations and the sense that they're regaining their self-identity and not tending to initially miss their partner. This is separation elation as the pressure to connect is gone. So how does the avoidant actually respond to being ignored? Well, they actually enjoy it at first. Don't worry, stage 7 is just around the corner, and that's when slowly but surely regret starts to creep in. But let's switch gears here and talk a little bit about how anxious exes will respond to being ignored. And it's important to note that anxious exes are without a doubt the rarest type of ex we encounter on our work here at Ex-Boyfriend Recovery. Actually, that's maybe not true. There's one ex that's actually even rarer than these, but we'll get to that in a minute. So, what typically happens when you ignore an anxious ex? Well, usually something like this. I took a screenshot from my community, and basically this is something real life scenario of a woman who was using the no contact rule on her ex, and she said, "Mine called me 72 times in 5 days over Facebook Messenger, his work phone, his personal phone, his Google Voice account." That is on top of texting. He even tried to request $1 from me in Facebook Messenger to get me to open the app. I kept a log. Here you go. Day 1, nothing. Day 2, nothing. Day 3, called 8 times on the phone, Google Voice and Messenger, FaceTime, messaged 2 and 3 times, texted me twice, all within about an hour. Day 4, text me in the morning, requested $1 through Facebook Messenger. You get the idea. Wild, right? Well, this is the anxious response to silence. Remember, their core wound is a fear of abandonment. Their core wound just came true. Now they're doing everything they can to try to fix the situation, but if you are ignoring them, guess what? They're going to try to fix the situation even harder. Now, it's akin to a child throwing a tantrum, except it usually plays out over texts, calls, and unannounced show-ups. So let's now go to fearful exes. So how does a fearful ex respond to being ignored? So fearful avoidants are super interesting to me because they are so rare, and their response to silence is unique. Now, generally, it's been my experience that when you ignore a fearful avoidant, they first go through separation elation, but it's an extremely shortened version of it, one that lasts maybe a week before that anxious side starts kicking in. But they usually don't swing to the extreme as simple as a snap. Usually, they'll do something passive-aggressive over social media to get your attention. Posting one of those "I'm better that I'm single now" type posts. Relationships are like glass. Sometimes it's better to leave them broken than to try to hurt yourself putting it back together. They're doing this almost as a tester to see if you'll break first. If you don't, then you can expect them to escalate and start reaching out. Usually, it's not going to be as extreme as a full-on anxious individual, but there will be hints of it. Here's the important bit, though. If you don't respond or at least nurture that anxious side when it does reach out, they'll retreat further inwards towards their avoidance side and take even longer before their anxious side gets triggered again. This is why one of the big changes that we've made to our program or are planning to make to our program is that we've started recommending shorter no contact periods for clients with fearful avoidant exes. And now let's move on to the final, and I stand corrected, most rare type of ex. A look at how secure exes handle being ignored. So what is the secure way to handle a breakup? Well, I think it's a variation of allowing yourself to feel your feelings, seeking support from trusted individuals, distracting yourself, healing. But there's one thing that separates the secure ex from the insecure ex. They're confident that they will get over the breakup. Usually secure people will respond to being ignored by trying to reach out a few times, taking the hint that you don't want to talk, and then backing off for a bit until you are ready to talk. Of course, secure exes are actually even rarer than anxious exes in our program. Want to know why? Because often secure exes don't feel the need to go online for help with their breakups. They trust themselves to do what needs to be done, and that's not a slight on anyone listening or watching or reading this. It's purely a numbers game. The numbers tell us that the most likely pairing that we are going to see is anxious client and avoidant ex. Secure exes in this business are a lot like unicorns.